top advisor to Dr. Anthony Fauci at the National Institutes of Health reportedly admitted that he used a personal email account, quote, in an apparent effort to evade the structures of the Freedom of Information Act, according to The Intercept. Now, this is also according to records obtained by congressional investigators investigating COVID-19's origins. The senior scientific advisor to Fauci, David M. Morens, wrote in a September 2021 email that was sent to scientists involved in the COVID origins discussion, quote, as you know, I try to always communicate on Gmail because my NIH email is FOIA'd constantly. Stuff sent to my Gmail gets to my phone, but not my NIH computer. Just send to any of my addresses, and I will delete anything I don't want to see in the New York Times.
In an email from July 2021 that was also included in the reporting, Morens appears to describe getting approval from Fauci himself. Quote, for many months, I have not been approved to talk about origins on the record, but today, to my total surprise, my boss, Tony, actually asked me to speak to the National Geographic on the record about origins. I interpret this to mean that our government is lightening up, but that Tony doesn't want his fingerprints on origin stories. Twitter Files author Michael Shellenberger tweeted, Fauci said scientists had independently concluded a COVID lab leak was unlikely. Now, a new email makes clear that he was the one who orchestrated the quote-unquote disinformation campaign against it. Tony Fauci doesn't want his fingerprints on origin stories. The email that contains Morens' statements was part of a broader exchange in which Morens and his scientist correspondents denounced media coverage by The Intercept and other publications concerning the origins of COVID, and harshly criticized those who take seriously the possibility that the virus emerged from a research accident in Wuhan, China. They also laid out their own arguments in favor of a natural origin for the virus. Author of the public Substack and the Twitter Files, Michael Shellenberger, joins us now to weigh in. Michael, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me.
So I think it was pretty well known that Dr. Fauci was involved in the decision by the public health community to downplay the likelihood of a lab leak for the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this brings his involvement to a new level where it seems like he was actually perhaps the orchestrator of that cover-up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we already knew that in late January 2020, Fauci's own scientific advisors were telling him that they thought a lab leak was more likely than a natural zoonotic crossover, and yet went ahead a few days later and worked with them to publish both an open letter in Lancet calling lab leak theories conspiracy theories, and then also working on this famous proximal origin paper for Nature Medicine. So we know that Fauci was involved in it. He then went on repeatedly to cite the proximal origins paper as proof that it had been debunked, and never mentioning that he had been directly involved in pushing that line and then orchestrating the peer-reviewed publication in Nature Medicine. Now we know that he was also involved in orchestrating basically the PR response. So it's I strongly recommend people to just read the emails. It's very shocking. These are not behaviors of scientists. These are behaviors of propagandists. They are literally discussing ways to disparage highly qualified and independent scientists, including Alina Chan, who wrote a book with Matt Ridley on the origins of the COVID-19 virus. And so it's quite honestly, it's despicable behavior. I think we've seen scandal after scandal relating to COVID origins. We've now seen the intelligence community attempting to cover up what is very clear evidence that the intelligence community knows who the first patients to get COVID-19 are. We can't trust this administration on this issue anymore. There needs to be a bipartisan 9/11 style commission to get to the bottom of what caused the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, I think to the point about these emails being mishandled, it sounds like this could potentially be a criminal offense, but certainly violates the standards of communication within the department. I mean, when they had this hearing on the coronavirus pandemic in the select subcommittee in 2021, you had some communication from Brad Wenstrup, the Republican out of Ohio, to say that it appears that Morenz violated the Freedom of Information Act, or rather tried to intentionally circumvent it by intentionally deleting federal records from his email. It sounds to me like we could see some charges pressed against Morenz, because again, this is potentially violating civil and criminal record retention laws. Do you think we'll see any recommendations for prosecution come out of the Project on Government Oversight, specifically given that Scott Amy, the general counsel at the nonpartisan Project on Government Oversight, has suggested this?
I hope so. I mean, I think it's important, particularly for progressives, to remember that the Freedom of Information Act is this really important public interest law. It means that we should have access to the internal conversations between government employees, like the kinds that were revealed yesterday, and that they should not, and that if they're going to use their private Gmail account, then we should have access to the correspondence with their Gmail account. And the standard by the courts has been that the more that their Gmail accounts or their personal accounts are being used for the public's business, then the more that the public should have access to those private Gmails. My concern, however, is that they're going to end up scapegoating this particular person, Morenz, who, yeah, sure, he was high level, but we need to get to the bottom of what caused the pandemic in the first place. Did we cause the pandemic? Did taxpayers fund the research that led to the pandemic? Did Anthony Fauci and Peter Daszak cause the pandemic and then cover up their own role in it? These are really important questions, not least because this kind of research continues, including in laboratories that many scientists say are totally inadequate for preventing another pandemic. So I think what we're looking at, just to put a fine point on it, is that we may be in the process of creating future pandemics from lab leaks, and in part because there has been so much resistance and cover up of what U.S. government has funded in the past in China in terms of doing this coronavirus research to make the virus more infectious. So I kind of can't think of a more shocking scandal, and I think that it's time for Congress to act, because it's clear that the Biden administration and the intelligence community is intent on continuing with this cover-up, not delivering the information that we know that they have.
Dr. Fauci was dishonest to Congress when he was asked about gain-of-function research being funded by the NIH. And he also was apparently involved in Evergrande, the Chinese company, trying to give a donation to Harvard Medical School at the same time that scientists were discussing the origins of the virus. Yet Dr. Fauci has just been hired on at Georgetown University as a distinguished professor. Why is academia so intent on protecting someone who clearly did a lot of harm with his public health policy?
Well, exactly. I mean, I think that the academics have been part of the disinformation campaign, attacking the lab leak, part of the censorship. And I just want to make a point here, because I think that there's so many things that have happened in the last few years, even the last few months, that this term conspiracy theorist has been thrown around. I think it's worth reminding ourselves how many conspiracies have been proven. So we know that they covered up evidence of a lab leak. They framed Trump as a Russian asset. That Joe Biden's family was involved in influence peddling. We know that there was Pentagon cover-up of UFO evidence, as confirmed by Senator Marco Rubio. We know there was a disinformation campaign around Hunter Biden's laptop. We now know the World Health Organization is indeed trying to seize excess powers. And we know there was an effort to censor disfavored voices. So after you see so many of these conspiracies, which is the proper definition of them, proven true, I think that if you're not a conspiracy theorist, if you're not considering the ways in which government officials have been secretly acting against the public interest, then you're either a dupe or perhaps a propagandist for the continued cover-up of those conspiracies. For me, that's the big takeaway from this event, is that we should be more impatient and angry and distrustful of these government officials, given how many conspiracies have been proven in recent months.
It seems to me that from the perspective of these institutions, their motivation is they're fearful that if they were transparent that this could have been a lab leak, that would mean many people would not want to fund this experimental research around things like contagious viruses, around epidemics, that there could be leaks and there could be consequences of those leaks, global pandemics, for example. But I think maybe the mistrust comes from a lot of folks who are technocratic and who are in these universities not being transparent about their research and not being transparent about what's going on during COVID. The communication was abysmal. Would you point to that as the source of mistrust as well?
Yeah, for sure. And I would also note it's another example of the elites projecting upon the public. The elites are paranoid that somehow the public is going to shut down all of their research. I think most people would like to see research into including dangerous activities. I am, for example, a big advocate of research on nuclear energy. There are hazards with it. I think most people would like to see research with biological and chemicals, but we would like proper oversight. We're in a situation where the scientists have gone wild and they're acting like big corporations and that they don't want any regulatory oversight. That's outrageous. This is taxpayer funded. It poses massive risk to the population, as we have seen with the pandemic. And here they are basically plotting in these emails. I mean, to read these emails, it's really quite sickening, to be honest with you. They're sitting there describing other independent, highly qualified scientists as crackpots and nut jobs and conspiracy theorists, using the nastiest, foulest language, including, I will single out Angela Rasmussen, who is absolutely one of the nastiest people that has been out there on social media, insulting people, insulting good scientists, suggesting that all of her critics are acting in bad faith, when in fact the people that have done so much work on this issue, and we should really give them credit, it is people like Richard Ebright and Alina Chan and Matt Ridley and all of the folks online that have gotten the word out about this. These are people that were motivated by the public interest, and they're being disparaged by these very powerful scientists who get tens of millions of dollars from taxpayers, who are simply demanding that we have some oversight into what they're doing. So I think, look, we've seen an abuse of power in so many different institutions in our society: the FBI, the CIA, the White House, CDC, NIH, NIAID. Congress needs to act forcefully at this point. There needs to be a 9/11 style investigation. We did get to the bottom of the 9/11 hijackers. The idea that somehow, oh, we'll never know, that's part of the propaganda that the intelligence community is putting out. I really hope Congress finds its courage and demands what should have been done a long time ago, which is establishing this bipartisan commission to get to the bottom of this, and then have something like a church commission that we had in the 1970s to clean house. You've got to get these power-mad bureaucrats out of positions of power and put in place people who really care about the public interest, who believe in transparency, who believe in the Freedom of Information Act, and are going to stop acting like such entitled, out of control bureaucrats and scientists who think that somehow the public should not have oversight over their activities when we clearly need much more.
Michael Shellenberger, thank you for your reporting on this and dedication to public interest and finding the origin of COVID-19.
Thanks for having me.